could start the recording. Thanks. So welcome back to the doctoral program. Next, we have a panel discussion with 4 academics who are more senior than PhD students. That was the sort of requirement. And the topic of the discussion will be on presenting your work. And I'll do my best. So for you who are not on the panel, I'll do my best of monitoring the chat and asking questions that you can put there. And then if you want to say something directly, I would ask that you first raise your hand and then I can give you turn to speak. But the panelists are, of course, free to speak freely, so to say. So let's start with an introduction round. First, we have Kristen Solnon from Int'l de Lyon. Do you want to present yourself?
Yes, sure. So I am a professor of computer science at Int'l de Lyon and a researcher in a lab, which is called CT. Did you want me to say more things than that?
I mean, we can get into the discussion afterwards. That's good, okay. Good to start with. Thanks. So the second panelist is Thias Kunz from KU Leuven.
Yeah, that's correct. So I'm a professor in Leuven in Belgium, and I work on the intersection of machine learning and constraint programming, and I enjoy giving talks.
Good. And then we have Susana Derezander from the Institute of Mathematics of the Czech Academy of Sciences.
Yeah, so hi, I'm Susanna. I'm currently a postdoc here at the Czech Academy of Sciences, and I'll be starting as an assistant professor in a couple of months. And I work with, well, proof complexity, like what's behind SAT solvers.
And finally, we have Jefferson from the University of St. Andrews.
Yes, I'm Jefferson from the University of St. Andrews. I'm a reader, which for those not familiar with the UK system is kind of above a lecturer, below a professor. We just make random titles up. And yeah, so I've started off in constraint programming. I still do constraint programming, but I particularly look at applications of constraint programming to mathematics. And also I do some stuff on games as well.
Thanks. So thanks everyone for being here. And what I thought we would do is sort of divide this up roughly into 3 themes. I was thinking we would start with talking about your own presentations and how you like to prepare for them, give them, what do you feel about presenting yourself? Then about you as an audience member, what do you want to see? What do you prefer in talks that you listen to? And then finally, depending a bit on how much time we have, talk a bit about these video presentations and giving talks in a post-pandemic world. So we could maybe start with this. How do you feel about giving presentations? How often do you do it? How do you prepare for them? I could just, maybe Kristen could go over.
Okay, I can start. So it's quite a pleasure to give talks, but like Christopher Jefferson, I enjoy giving talks when I see people in front of me, and I really don't like it when, like today, I don't see anybody, so I'm sorry. It's not that pleasure when this is with Zoom. How often do I give talks? Well, if I consider lectures as talks, very often, every week. And actually, I think doing lectures helps in being able to do presentations, but it's a bit different too. So if I only consider talks, research talks, I'd say every 2 months, maybe. And was there another question? I think that's all.
Can I ask then? I'm assuming you have PhD students of your own.
Yeah.
Do you make them give lectures, or do you have them lecture as well?
Well, in France, it's PhD students are not always lecturers. and then they do practicals. But no plenary talks for teaching. But of course, for conferences, they do talks. That's the point. The practice.
Yes. Anyone else? If you stick with the same order, maybe yes then.
Yeah, if we follow. So for me, it's about, so not counting teaching, which is also weekly typically. So academic presentation is about once a month. And yeah, I do enjoy, as I already said, giving those, but also preparing them, because I think it's a bit of always a bit of a storytelling exercise. And yeah, I think that's, if you look at it from that perspective, it makes it fun to make it as well. And you asked a question about how in the lab, how you do PhD students who gives the presentations. So we have a kind of the policy that the first author should present it, most preferably. And yeah, that's what we typically do. So the talks that I give are typically more like tutorials or invited talks or things like that. Yeah.
Do the first authors always want to, or do you have to persuade them?
Well, yeah, I mean, so, I mean, what's persuading, right? So the answer is persuading, but then again, I mean, as part of your PhD trajectory, you will also need to defend at the very end, and that includes a presentation, and you need to give intermediate presentations. So that's part of the learning experience that you need to get, and you can only do that by doing it. So yeah,
sure.
Yes.
About Susanna?
Well, yeah, I've also, at least this last year, I've been giving more or less one presentation a month, one seminar a month. Wait, what the other question? I forgot the questions. How do you decide which author?
Yeah.
So I don't know if it's only like in my area, but we usually go for the youngest author. We don't really have an order of authors and papers. They're usually just alphabetically ordered. So then we just go like the youngest academically author gives the presentation, unless there's some reason to change that rule. Okay. So I think that gives a good practice for the young people coming up. Yeah.
So pretty much the same idea of teaching, sort of using the presentations to teach the younger.
Yes.
Yes.
Exactly.
How about Int'l, Andrews? Same thing?
Yeah, very similar. I've recently been giving a lot of talks at maths events. One thing I find interesting is maths and CS talks are very different. You might sort of think like the way people give talks is the way everybody gives talks. Like mathematicians, like in the talk, so I'm not suggesting you do this, they'll have like sort of 20, 30 references to other papers. Like you have to name everybody who has ever done anything in the area or people get very upset with it. Whereas I'd say in CS, we're much more relaxed. Yeah, we would also tend to give the sort of youngest person who was involved in the paper. I mean, many papers do have an obvious first author. Particularly things are often like related to a PhD student's or a postdoc's work. And so they feel they own it. Like Susanna, we almost always give paper authors in alphabetical order. And except in exceptional circumstances, usually if it's a PhD student's work and it's going to go in their thesis, but some other people helped on the paper, you put them first because you want to be clear that work is the PhDs. And yeah, in general, we try to make PhDs give talks. I would say there are very, very few people where the first talk they gave, I would classify as good. There is occasional people who are just natural people who give talks. They just stand up and immediately it's just fluid, understandable, entertaining. And I can think of like one PhD student who I would put in that category. The way you get better at talks is by giving a bunch of talks, and some of those talks are gonna be bad, but you get better.
So it's sort of a general question for anyone who has any comments. How do you then, you all brought up this about teaching younger academics to PhD students. Can you speak a bit on how do you then give them feedback? Do they practice their talks in your group before going to the conference, or do you tell them afterwards what they did wrong or right, or how do you do it?
I think I'll go out and we'll go. We can go reverse, maybe reverse. Yeah, so we would always make them practice it in the building first. We're often, well, we don't try to be mean, but sometimes the feedback is your entire talk is awful and you need to just do the whole thing again. And then they go and give it at the conference. There is different things which are difficult. So sometimes it's the technical talk and sometimes it's people having the confidence to stand and give the talk. One of the advantages of pre-recorded talks is you at least get the chance to do it several times. I know some people don't like standing up in front of people. As Christine said, and I said earlier, I'm going to be honest, I really like having feedback from the audience. I do tend to adjust the talk as I'm giving it, and I encourage PhD students to do that. Although I'm saying lots of things. I'm going to say one more thing. One thing I do think PhD students should not do, and I tell them not to do, is do not try to emulate the best speakers you see immediately. So there are speakers who can have 3 slides that have a picture of, I don't know, like a flower and a dog and a graph and speak for an hour and be entertaining and because they don't need the structure of the slides. And I'm going to be honest, you don't want too much text on your slides. It is okay to want the structure of the slides to help you and not try to do these super minimal talks. They were briefly very trendy. They seem to have got a bit less trendy again now in academia. I don't know what other people think.
The variant of that I've heard is just don't put equations or formulas on your slides. But other than that, text is okay, just not formulas. That's what I've been told.
Yeah, I disagree, but I'll let Susanna go first.
Oh, okay. Yeah. No, I was thinking this about preparing PhD students. What Christopher said, that sometimes, someone will give a talk and they'll just say, the whole structure is wrong. You're not focusing on what's important. So one thing I think is good is to first go over the slides before the PhD student actually presents it. So that you at least see, is the structure correct? And once they have feedback on that and have the slides looking like something that has the right focus, then you can give feedback on the presentation. So I feel like these two different aspects that have both to be put in the right place. And yeah, I don't know, maybe Tias wants to say something about the equations. And
No, go ahead.
No, I agree that they're minimizing text and even words that are not necessary for the slide. You don't have to have complete English sentences. Also helps keeping the focus and not losing too much time reading things. But yeah, go ahead, Tias.
Yeah, well, I'll first start with the general question about preparing. So also in our lab, we have the habit you're expected to give a practice presentation. And I try to always do it myself as well, because I can very clearly see the difference between talks for which I have done a practice talk and for which talks I haven't. It's the only way in which I can divide talks. The ones that I have given a practice presentation, they just feel better. And then the ones that I didn't, those are the ones that involve the bad ones, like Christopher typically said. That's typically in that category. We also do it as a group, meaning that it's not just me giving feedback, but also the others are expected to give feedback. And I think this is also a good exercise, because as a PhD student, as you develop in your career, it's not just about getting feedback, but also getting into the mindset of, what can be improved and what kind of feedback could I give, instead of only being on the receiving end. So I think that's also a good part of development. So that's on that part. And then about the equations. So I do agree that just putting equations on slides is bad practice, but I think the rule of no equations is a bit too strict. So for example, sometimes one equation is really central, And then I think there are tricks that you can do, like show the equation, but then use like colored lines to underline specific parts and to write in words what the meaning behind them is. And so presentations that do that, I very much appreciate it. And I try to do it sometimes as well. So if you show one, like give like some annotations that help the audience how to read this equation instead of just throwing it at it. Just throwing equations, that's bad, but you can help, I think. Yeah.
For sure.
I do agree with Tias that sometimes it's good to have some equations, well, very important equations. It's nice to see them on the slides, but of course we don't read the equation, we explain and give the intuition of what is behind it. And that's the difference between a paper and a slide. In the paper, you write the equation, and in the slide, you can explain why is it this way. That was the first I wanted to say, and I agree with all what have been said. So I'm just going to add something different, which is maybe typical from France. My students do practice their talks because most of them are really not fluent in English. That's the problem. I guess some other countries are like France, but in France it is a real problem to be able to say things in English, even if you can read it and write it quite fluently. It's much more difficult to say it in English, and so they have to practice. So we all our internal talks we ask to do it in English. And even myself, I still have difficulties in doing talks in English. That's the challenge for us.
So can I ask, so how do you give feedback on that? Because we also occasionally have it, but I find it one of the most difficult things, like if you just say, you're speaking a bit monotone, that the student doesn't, I mean, it's true, but like it's difficult if that's your way of speaking to change that. So I don't know if you have.
I just ask them to watch films in English. That's I think the best advice to give to them to be able to, because we have two difficulties. The first one is to be able to speak in English, but the second one is to be able to understand what is being said. For example, when people ask you questions at the end of a talk, you must be able to understand the question, and that's a real challenge for some students who are able to read English. Reading English is much easier than understanding. So maybe this is only in France, because I can see that in Northern Europe, for example, people fluently speak in English. That's.
No, but I also agree with what Tia said about practicing. I find myself often thinking, I know what to say here, or I know how to say this, but unless I actually try saying it out loud, I might when I try saying it, I notice, well, no, I don't. I have to think about how I'm gonna say this. Thinking is a lot easier than actually saying.
Yeah. And my advice for the first talks is to write the hard sentences. At some point, there are some sentences which are difficult to find because they are a bit tricky to express. And I advise my students to write what they want to say, not the whole talk, of course, but the sentences which are difficult to find with the right words. And so I advise them to write it, and of course not to read it, but having written it once, help them to find the right words and the right way to say it in English in front of people.
For sure.
And maybe I could say for English, native English speakers, my advice is to always keep in mind that some people in the audience are not fluent as they are. So always speak slowly. Don't use very difficult, slang or difficult vocabulary, because in this case, non-native English speakers don't understand completely everything. So that would be nice for the younger PhDs.
Maybe we could sort of end this section with the last question, sort of, which was, what do you consider the goal of, and let's keep this concrete for a PhD student, goal of a paper presentation that you give in a conference? What's the goal of that presentation? What are you trying to accomplish with that?
I can start on that if you want.
Yeah, sure.
I think the main goal is to make attendees want to read your paper. And if they want to read the paper at the end of the talk, then you've won. So don't try to explain everything, but instead of that, give your motivations. Why is it important to solve this problem? And give the intuition of your contributions. But it is not necessary to explain in detail all the technical stuff, because for example, if you have a very nice theorem, you can explain the intuition of the theorem and why you needed it. But it's not necessary to give the complete proof in the talk, because there is the paper. So the goal is that people want to read your paper.
Yeah, so I agree that that's the ultimate goal, but I think even if they don't end up reading it, I think that the 2 points that I probably want them to get most is to understand the motivation and then the core contributions. So that even if they don't want to read it immediately, they might think about it later. It's like, but I once heard a presentation about such a topic, and then search for it. So yeah, that's for me as to, for them to understand the motivation and what the key contribution is.
Yeah, I'd agree with that. I think not only a small group of the audience when I'm presenting in conferences are people that will read the paper, even for any presentation. So I'd like to focus on what would I like them to remember after this, which is what Tias was saying. Okay, what is the problem that we're addressing here? What's the reason why we care about this, and something about our contribution. But so that they have this, if they ever have some reason for caring about this, they might remember, oh, there was this talk about this subject, or they know, like when I'm attending a talk, or talks in a conference, many of these are not exactly in my area. So what I'm looking for is, I want to know what people are doing out there, like what's new, what kind of things are people working on. So I try to keep these two things in mind, like trying to satisfy the people who are there just to know what people are working on, and then also the people who actually have a chance to read the paper and give them some taste of what the paper is like. So
yeah, I kind of agree with everyone. I don't have a lot to say. I'll just back up one point Kristen made, which is a mistake I find PhD students make a lot, which is this idea of the intuition. It's exactly what Kristen said and other people backed up, that you want people to get the idea of what your paper's about. In particular, often PhD students, they really, really want to, when they're describing what their paper does, they want to kind of say, oh, but like if the set is empty, of course, you have to special case it. Like you do not have to say that. Like people can go and read the paper. You want to talk about the interesting cases. Almost always, I would say, like with algorithms, it is better to give an example of the algorithm, and then people will get a flavor as to what it's about, rather than to like put pseudocode on a screen and be like, the set gains another member, and no one will follow this, and they can go and read the paper. But no, I think, getting what you want is people to know your work, read the paper, and also, as people say, like 5, and I get this, like 5 years down the line, I'll go, I remember seeing a talk, and it was, where was it? It was in a hot country, and someone was talking about this, and then you go and you find the paper and read it. And good talks will stick with you for years. You'll remember them in the back of your head.
So I said we would move on, but I thought I'd ask a short question, then you since we're all talking about this intuition, give the intuition, give the motivations. How long do you prefer a conference presentation to be? CP has, I think, 20 minutes now. CP has 10 minutes. If you would be allowed to choose, how long would you have conference presentations be?
That's a very difficult one. I'm just used to filling the time that they give to me.
So as long as possible. Well, we can. I'll spin it a bit to make it maybe a bit easier. If you're in the audience, how long do you want to listen for?
So I would say partially this is now going to be, partially depends on the conference, and this was something related to what Susanna said. So when I go to like ICHCAI or ECAI, where lots of the talks are far away from my field, and I think one year they gave people 10 minutes, and like in 10 minutes, they haven't even got the chance to introduce, like basically I have no chance of understanding any of the talks, because by the time they've introduced whatever field they're in, deep learning or whatever, I don't know, whatever it is, I have no idea. Whereas in CP, like many of the talks are about finite domain constraint programming, not everybody, but and even when they're not, people have a vague idea what it's about. I mean, in an ideal world, we'd probably give people different amounts of time, but as Tia says, I'm not sure people tend to just take the time you give them. I think if you told people their talks could be shorter, I'm not sure anyone would take it. I think 20 minutes with questions is quite good. That's usually enough time for people to...
Good questions, yeah. Yeah, I think 10 minutes is probably the lower bound. Like you shouldn't do fewer than that, unless it's just a highlight, that's fine. Like on the website of CP this year, I think that's okay. Yeah, I would also think that 20 minutes, including questions, feels natural, but it could be a bias.
Yeah, I think we'll talk about this later, but I think that also with these longer video presentations, recorded video presentations, then it can make sense to have like shorter, just selling your video kind of talks. But usually I would say, yeah, 20 minutes sounds like a nice nice amount. If possible, a little bit longer if it's a more focused conference. I think that's also nice, but otherwise 15, 20 minutes.
I think the one I prefer the best, the SAT conference had sort of a 20-minute submit a video, one video that's for 20 minutes and one that's, I think it was 5. So in the sessions, they showed these 5-minute videos, and then whoever was interested could then go and watch the 20-minute video afterwards. And for me, that worked really well. All right, so maybe we'll switch sort of the mindset a bit, going from how you would present to how you would listen when you go to a conference. How do you pick out which sessions to attend, which presentations you want to hear? Do you read the papers? Do you skim through the head paper topics, or what do you do?
I can start if you want. Usually, I've read the paper before. I attend the talk because I have questions on it. It's, well, maybe not half of the talks I attend. I have already read the paper, not complete in all details, but I've gone through it, and I know I will be interested in the talk, and I still have some questions, and the talk helps me to get the intuition. So that's why I go to the talk. So usually I like to read the paper first, but very briefly.
Yeah, I don't think I've ever read a paper before I went to a presentation, so I'm in a different camp there. I mostly choose based on the title. That's my primary thing, and then there's also some authors that I follow and that I generally think, or labs that are doing work that really interests me, and so I sometimes also just pick based on authors, but mostly it's based on the title. Yeah. And sometimes I actually open a paper during the talk, and then I go through it like, oh, but how do they really do it? And then I might ask a question on that even, but beforehand that hasn't happened yet. Yeah.
So I often try to go to talks, so there's obviously so many different things. I try to go to talks which are kind of at the periphery of things I'm interested in. So if it's a topic where it's like, someone's doing like the same thing as me or something directly in my research area, then first I will read the paper often after the conference. And secondly, I don't kind of need their talk to tell me, because I'm going to understand the paper unless it's terribly written, because it's my, like I do a lot of solver design, so I don't tend to go to talks about solver design. I can just skim read the paper and get the ideas. And so I try to go to talks about things which are just sort of slightly outside my usual area. So I'll understand them. I don't want to go to something I'll have no idea about, but I learn things like papers I wouldn't bother reading, basically. I'll also be honest, just out of honesty, like I also often, like, just because I'm going to say it's like, I often go to the talks of my friends, particularly if it's the type of conference where I'm worried they won't get a huge audience. Some talk comes from conferences that have like 8 tracks or something. And you go to support your friends, that's fine as well. Like you go, you make sure they have there. Maybe you even ask them a nice question if no one's asking anything.
Even if it's a topic you don't know that much about yourself.
Yeah, just sort of go along just to give them some moral support, make sure they have friendly faces in the audience. It depends on the conference. If they're going to get 200 people in the room, it's not necessary, they don't need you. But
so maybe to begin on so the like exploring other topics. So in the traditional, I think for me that's like one of the things that changed from physical conferences to online conferences. So in physical conferences, you typically have parallel tracks, and if none of the tracks are on your core topic, I do the same as what Chris said. I just choose the kind of things I would like to know more about, things that I think are trending that could be relevant for a project in a few years or potential collaboration maybe. And so I still go to a track, to one of the sessions, just out of interest to get to know a bit the feeling. But now with the online conferences, yeah, I end up in my mailbox typically. And I think that's probably a loss. Yeah,
I'd say that's something nice about being physically present in conferences, that they already organize the either tracks or sessions according to topics. So it's easier just to sit through a session, and you don't have to go finding all the papers that interest you, finding their videos. So I think it's nice to be able to choose a few papers you like, but then sit through a session and learn more about certain areas. Yeah, definitely.
A question I thought of that's not on the questions I sent you here is, how do you feel about, I remember being a PhD student myself, and I think it was CP, I sort of went up to a more senior researcher I had, whose work my paper was based on, and then I just asked them, I'm gonna give a talk in, I don't know, an hour or so, come here, you should come hear it. Does this happen to you? Would you recommend that people do this?
Yes. So for me, it happened the first time at one of these massive OR conferences where you have like 20 parallel sessions. And one of the authors, she just mailed to like, I don't know, I think 20 different people like, hey, I think this might be interesting to you. And I actually went to the session, and yeah, I'm glad that the person invited me. And so, yeah.
So
I think if you can take the time to look up, or if there's people that you want to have in your session, yeah. For me, it was new. I would never have thought of doing this myself, but yeah.
Yeah, I would definitely. I think it's when you're a PhD student, it's very easy to imagine the professors are these like serious senior people with their serious senior things to do. And then once you get there, like, you're just exactly the same. Like, we're not. And there is basically no professor who isn't going to want to talk about their own work or your work, which is in their field. One of the things which is hardest about virtual conferences, and is definitely, in my opinion, the biggest loss, is going out for lunch and dinner with people. I think if you're at a conference, and I think like we're doing this a bit this afternoon, if there is any opportunity in a virtual conference to have some kind of socialization, I realize we're supposed to be talking about presentations and I'm talking about the not presentation bits of conferences, I would strongly recommend it. I think like my first 2 postdoc positions were both with people who I met at conferences, like had dinner with them, we chatted, then they knew who I was. So when I don't understand, but when I applied for the job, they knew who I was. I wasn't just a completely random person. And I suspect that was helpful. So while we're talking about talks, do try to do all the things in the conference which are not talks.
Which brings me to, is there such a social track here at CP? There seems to be not really like is that correct, or did I
don't think the main conference, we're going to play some games with the CP participants later today, but I don't think the main conference has anything. Okay. I'm not sure though, I might be wrong.
I did see that the breaks are also in a Zoom room, so you can go there, but then, yeah, if there are 20 people, it could be,
yeah, it's hard to get this one-on-one discussions in the Zoom setting. So if we could take a moment to get this sort of older people giving advice to younger people, do you have any, could you speak a bit on some kind of specifics of talks that you've watched that you remember? What kind of things in a presentation will give a positive impact in your eyes, or even negative? But if you're going to give negative examples, I would rather you not mention anyone by name. What do you like to see in a conference presentation?
Enthusiasm. It's nice
Sorry,
to see people happy of what they've done. So this is important. I must say that I have watched all videos of the doctoral program, and I found most of them really very, very, very good. So I don't have lots of advices to give to them, because they are good, and only a few of them were less good, but that was quite good.
If I can dig in on that a bit, why did you find them good? That might be a hard question, but
because it was quite clear. The motivations were clear, the contributions were clear too, and so it was nice. I enjoyed the Mr. Potato teasing, but I only seen the teaser. I see he's here, Mathieu Valvy. His teaser is really funny, but I've not seen his full video. I think it is not yet available, so it was only a teaser. It was really nice. Make me laugh.
Did you, Susanna, have something?
Oh, I was thinking, yeah, some talks which stick to you too, or that get you engaged. So I like it when there's some kind of interaction. Okay, these not for video talks is a bit harder, but if it's online video talks, I've also seen that work. If you get some like small example and like start with having people think about it and getting people engaged, I feel like that changes also my mode of listening. I'm like more participative because that's what the speaker is expecting. So it's it's one thing I think is nice to start off with. And another thing that I think is good would be to have at least the main gist of your contribution as early on as possible. Of course, sometimes you need some background in order to be able to, some motivation and able to present it. But sometimes there are talks when I'm trying to understand, okay, but what is the contribution? What is the contribution? And it only comes like very late in the talk. And so yeah, that's also a suggestion to, as soon as possible, mention what your contribution is.
Might be, oh, sorry, go ahead.
Oh, no, I was going to say, yeah, I'm trying to think of particular good talks I remember. I mean, it's hard to do. Some of the best talks, yeah, like interactivity, talks that manage to have surprises in them. Like, I do think there's something to be said for kind of telling a story. If you have a result which is surprising, then don't be afraid to kind of say, like, you might expect, but in fact, facts, like Sometimes people present things and I think that is not what I was expecting. In fact, there was a couple of the talks, I can't remember exactly, where people gave results that were surprising to me and they didn't seem to acknowledge they were surprising, which, and I kind of thought, like, is it me being weird that I think this is weird, or are you just too afraid to say, well, this isn't probably what you were expecting to see? So I think don't be afraid to sort of lean into that. I will kind of say the worst, so I'm not going to, actually, this doesn't apply to any of the doctoral talks. All the worst talks I've ever seen are the talks where by the end of slide 2, there's either been like 30 terms defined or 30 terms not defined, and then you just turn off for the rest of the talk. There are very few talks I've seen where I think there was too much introduction discussion of what the talk was going to be about. It is possible, but it's unusual. And there are a lot of talks. It's really hard to remember if you're in, I'm afraid of naming an area in case I hit someone's research area and they think I'm talking about them. Like, I don't know, you study, I don't know, squirrels, and you like, everybody knows the skeletal structure of squirrels, of course. Like, and no, we don't. Like, we're not in your area. We don't know. You can't just assume it and just charge straight into it. And it's so hard to remember what people don't know, especially when you don't have a lot of time.
Yes.
But yeah, there's a lot of talks where, like, I don't remember any talks I've ever seen I hated, but I remember a lot of talks where I just turned off after like 30 seconds and started doing something else, reading my email.
Yeah, my PhD advisor, who sometimes is a bit sort of direct in these things, going back to what Susanna said that you should have the motivation on the first slide so that people who are interested can keep listening, and people who are not can start reading their emails instead. Yeah,
I think I once got a bit of advice from Toby Walsh, who was very, I don't think he comes to CP anymore. I don't think he's here, but he was certainly big when I was a PhD student, and he's very big. Anyway, so he said that you should say what you're going to do, and then you should describe it, and then you should describe what you've done. And it will feel to you like this is ridiculously redundant. You do not have to 3 times explain your talk. But actually, the best talks do this. It's like we're saying, like, you start by giving the motivation, what you're going to do, then you give the details, and then at the end you go, and so what did we learn? Like, we did this. And it will feel, that amount of redundancy feels, when it's your stuff, it feels ridiculous. But actually, I think it does make a good talk. And Toby gives, if you ever are at somewhere where Toby's giving talks, I would recommend going to see them. He's very good at giving talks.
Yeah, I agree. So the talks that I remember most are typically invited talks. They're a different game, right? So it's like experienced people that are used to speaking, but they exactly do what Christopher said. Like, they say what they're gonna say, then they say it, and then they say what they said, and it works. And I think also for conference presentations, it can work. Yeah.
This sort of brings us, I think to the last question in the second theme. How has your views on ways of presenting, if you could go back and give yourself as a PhD student advice on how to change your own presentations, what would you say?
So
I guess.
Might I take the first one? This because I have to leave for another Model F session. I have a talk there. So I think it's been said before that understanding what your audience knows and doesn't know is super important. And so that it was Chris, right? It's a squirrel. So and yeah, it's like if you worked on a topic for a year, it's so difficult to think that somebody would not understand that you need this for that, or that ties in that way. And being able to step up from that, to step back actually and think about, okay, what do they actually know? That's, I think, that's difficult. And I think that's something that I've learned now to do better than before, is to estimate what does the audience understand. And if I say it this way, how many of them will understand it? Or if I say it this way, how many of them will understand it? And to make some choices based on that.
Sure. Thanks.
All right. So sorry that I have to go, but
thanks for being here.
Yeah.
Yes.
Later. Bye.
I would say I'll continue on. I would say the main thing. So I like just background in my research. I like really love programming. If I had my way, like I would just spend all my time programming. It's what I love. It's what I loved as a PhD student, so I still love now. And it's the way I would give talks. I would stand up and be like, let me show you this 60-line algorithm and explain it to you. And no, nobody wants to hear that talk. Or almost, I want to hear that talk. No one else wants to hear that talk. And it's certainly not suitable for a conference. There are times, like in your research group, where you do go into the nitty-gritty technical details. But I would spend far too much time explaining these really low-level nitty-gritty details. And yeah, I mean, I will be honest, people who were around when I started, like I gave some truly awful conference talks at CP. And I think they're much better now than they were then. And yeah, that was my biggest failing, was just getting, I wanted to tell people all the technical, because that's what you're most proud of. That's where you've spent all your time working. Like that's where you've spent like 3 weeks figuring out just the right way of having like the list of lists of lists where the first links to the third, and it's all super efficient, and it's why your graphs are so good, because it's like you did your caching, and you just you cannot get into that level of detail, even though it's the bit you're most proud of. As we said, you can hint at the ideas, but yeah.
Did anyone ever tell you that presentations were bad?
Yeah, people would tell. I mean, people I knew honestly would say honestly, and people in my research group. It is really hard to tell people they've given a bad talk. You definitely shouldn't do it immediately after they've spoken. We used to have like post-conference discussions after we went back, which I think is the better way to do it. You can go back and you can say, okay, that talk didn't go so well. I don't tell people straight after they've spoken that you hated it, because, well, hated is too strong. The work could have been presented better. Also, my PhD supervisor, and this is the thing we've been talking about, we didn't used to do practices. He would just be like, off you go to the conference and give the talk. So often the first time anyone saw it was me giving it at the conference. And in retrospect, that was a terrible idea.
Kristen, do you want to go ahead first? Oh.
Did she freeze maybe?
Maybe. Okay, well, I can say, yeah, so which has to do with what Christopher was saying. So would be to focus on the audience more than on yourself, because I think that was a mistake I did a lot. Was, well, I was nervous, and I was putting so much attention on how I had planned, I wanted to say this, and I missed the audience, like whether they were understanding, whether they were interested, where they had dozed off. And I think this was also has to do with giving a talk that I'm comfortable with. So at some point, I had an opposite, actually gave me a lot of feedback, and it helped me a lot. But I was trying to give the talk that he would have given, or that he had given feedback about. So at the point when I decided to let me make sure this is a talk that I'm comfortable with, that yeah, which is the way I would like to present it with the feedback I received. I think that helped a lot, being able to focus on the audience more. So yeah.
That's good. Very good. Are you connected, Kristen? Seems like it's poor.
One thing I'm just going to add, just sorry, in case Kristen comes back, is one thing to think about is, so this is interesting. This is like related. I only found this out recently. So I've recently been doing some research in games, and this is like a common thing people talk about in games. So often people are good at knowing what they don't like, but they don't necessarily know how to fix it. So when people are telling you what they don't like about your talk, it is okay to like take what they say, but you don't have to do the fix that they say. In particular, if you get like 8 people to listen to your talk, there's a very good chance they're going to give you contradictory advice. So what people might say is make that bit bigger, and someone else might say make that bit smaller or remove it. And you might feel like, what the heck? Like, I can't make it bigger and smaller. What they mean is like, it's bad. Like we don't fully know why, we don't understand it. So the person who's saying make it bigger is saying explain more of the details. And the person who's saying make it smaller is like, just focus on the main point. Like you're currently at a bad state, but do be prepared that there's a famous, like, yeah, if you ask like 8 academics for their opinion, you'll get like 12 opinions. So yeah, like listen to the issues and don't, I mean, you can take their fixes, but you don't have to.
So this I agree with, and this is something I've noticed myself when sort of moving towards more and more being the one who gives feedback. It's really hard to say how to fix something. It's quite easy to nitpick stuff that should be fixed, and this is something I'm trying to work on, but it's difficult for sure. I don't know what the state of Kristen's connection is, but maybe we could.
I think she's back.
Yes, I'm back. I'm sorry, I think I missed a part of the discussion because I really had problems with my connection.
Yeah, no.
It's be okay now.
So
Sorry.
I think no worries. I think the base question was if you could go back and teach yourself as a PhD student something about presenting, what would that be?
I think the most helpful talk I gave, the problem was a timing problem because well, the time was finished. I only finished my introduction, so it was horrible. It was one of my very first talks. So my first advice for my PhD students is to take a look at the time and don't have too much slides. Because otherwise you cannot finish your talk. And if you don't finish your talk, well, you've missed the point. But maybe that's I don't know if somebody has already told that.
No, that was good. I don't think we talked too much about timing. For me, what usually happens is that when I actually give the talk at a conference, I'm a bit nervous, so I end up speaking faster than when I practice. So I usually am left with time, not running over it.
Yeah, same here. I have to tell myself to speak slowly or else I'll be done in half the time. So
Yeah.
Yeah.
We're coming up on the hour. There was a question in the chat about recording real life conferences, but I think it's quite well covered. I haven't been to a real sort of in-person conference that would have been recorded. Has anyone of you?
It happened a few times, but not as often. And personally, I'm not completely convinced that it is very useful to have so many videos. And it may become a problem because we have videos of everything. And this is not sustainable, actually. I think it would be better to have papers. Papers are a nice way to define things. And well, talks are good for online when we are in front of people. Videos, I'm not, well, of course it is interesting to have some, for example, invited talks. It is interesting to have a video, and usually invited talks, you don't have to do the paper. So, okay, but recording everything, I'm not sure that's a good idea. And actually, I really don't like watching it, so I don't like being recorded. And I've been recorded a few times, and I don't like it.
Do you ever watch videos outside of conferences? Do you go back to the CP YouTube channel and watch presentations? Any one of you?
I've definitely watched videos, these pre-recorded videos after the conference when there's some topic I want to. I remember there was a paper about this. Let me check the video, and I like those. I especially like when people have longer recorded videos. explaining in more detail, more than the 20 minutes. So about some topic I'm interested in, I can just go to this longer video and jump directly to the point. So I appreciate having these online too.
That was kind of the sort of maybe last question I was going to ask. We heard a bit about you not liking remote conferences and online settings. So is there anything you like about them? Is there anything that we've gained from this pandemic, from the way that the pandemic changed conferences?
The chatting is really good. And well, today there is example of exchanges by chat, and it's very complementary from the talk. And you can ask questions during the talk, and other attendees can answer your questions. So that's really nice. And yeah. Even for my courses, I really appreciate the chat, because the students just answer their own questions. And at the end of the lesson, you can have a look at the chat and sometimes say, oh, your answer is not good. Why is it not good? And that's really very good things. But that's the only thing I appreciate for this kind of event. Otherwise, I really hate not seeing you in person. That's so sad.
Yeah, I'd say apart from the videos, which we talked about before, I think that at least some conferences I wouldn't have gone to in person because of traveling. It's nice to be able to somehow participate, but it, yeah. So that's one positive thing, I'd say.
It is, as someone said in the chat, it's cheaper.
Yes, I'm sure there's quite a lot of students who just couldn't, like, I mean, when we used, at one point I was in quite a large research group and it was CP, and we were sort of going, well, there's like 8 of us would like to go to CP, but there's really only money for 3. And then of course it's like, well, people who are giving talks have to go. So you end up sort of divvying up, and every paper you get a matching, like every paper has to send at least one author so they can give the talk. And in some cases, like we said earlier, actually, so I like, there was a bit of a lie earlier when we were saying who gives talks. There's definitely been cases when there's like one author in common between 2 papers. And so that person goes to the conference because we can't afford to send more than one person. And that person has to go because they're the only author of both papers, and so they give both talks. And there's definitely been times when the person we've sent has been based on money or things like that. You try to avoid it. And I would strongly hope people aren't having to pay out of their own pockets to go to conferences as much as possible. But I know it does happen sometimes. I would say also it is nice to see people. Some virtual conferences have done a better job of mingling. I went to one where there was they use a thing called Gather Town, and they were encouraging people to go and socialize there, and people were also going and socializing there, and it was working quite well. But it is super hard, and we definitely haven't learned yet how to do socializing in virtual conferences.
That I agree on fully. All right. Well, I mean, I think we covered most of the things I wrote down here, which is very impressive considering. So I'm gonna give every one of you an opportunity to say some concluding remarks. Do you have anything else to add? And if not, I would once again like to thank every one of you really much for being here. It was very interesting, and I learned a lot and gained new viewpoints, and I can only hope that the audience members did as well. The recording can be stopped.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, well, thanks a lot, Jeremias, for the invitation, and I also enjoyed a lot listening to the other people's views on the topic.
Mm-hmm.